Hi everyone, this is Paul here from the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm doing the astrology report for the week commencing the 1st of August, outlining some of the key aspects and transits for the week and giving an overview of what it all means for us. Before I do that, I just want to clarify that the astrology doesn't control our lives. It's a way of helping us to understand what the energies around us are doing, what kind of spiritual lessons are being highlighted to us at this time, and it gives us a context of what's unfolding around us so that we can respond to situations rather than react. But at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of each and every one of us as individuals to make best use of it and to participate in the process. It doesn't just happen automatically. Now, the main theme for this week is about our relationship with change and transformation. So we have the moon's going through signs as usual first. So we have the moon starting in Pisces. This is a time of kind of meditating and feeling that oneness and that connection with spirit. But the moon will quickly move into Aries on Wednesday itself, i.e. the 1st, so we'll feel that emotional need to assert ourselves, to take action, to pursue any goals that we want to achieve. And then on Friday the moon will enter Taurus, so this will be a time when we may feel that need to just slow down, take things a bit more slowly, to get that sense of groundedness. May even feel the desire to spend a bit of time in nature. Before on Monday the moon will move into Gemini, so this will be more of a time for researching things, connecting with one another, engaging, listening to and speaking to one another to learn new information. The main aspect that's kind of driving the question of our relationship with change will be Mars square to Uranus. This is exact on Wednesday itself, so feeling it at the most intense at the beginning of the week, but it will fade out over the rest of it. But this particular aspect highlights the challenge between the actions that we assert and our relationship with change, and how well or how comfortable we are connecting with the higher mind. And it's bring these two sides together. Now, one thing we need to be mindful of is because Mars is in Aquarius, so maybe trying to take action based on trying to assert our need for freedom. But what we're also looking at is how well, or are we comfortable taking our guidance from that higher source? Are we comfortable opening ourselves up to the higher mind and being willing to change the way we do things? Are we creatures of comfort, or are we ready to embrace change and do things another way? Because another thing is, we need to be mindful that with this particular square, one thing that can manifest is people can be either trying to assert themselves for the sake of rebellion because they want to try to prove their own uniqueness, but they don't actually really know themselves. But it can also be sudden releases of temper, because Mars obviously rules our anger, or rules assertiveness, but for most of us, we struggle to assert ourselves in a healthy way, so it comes out as anger instead. So we need to be very mindful that when we encounter situations where we can feel that we need to change the way we're doing things, we need to be mindful that we don't respond in anger, that we take that moment to breathe. Because the thing is, Mars also deals with objectivity, but it requires that we move beyond the anger first. So it's seeing, where do we need to change our approach to things? Where do we have a tendency to allow the ego to have full reign over our actions and desires, so the actions and desires we're pursuing are not actually beneficial for us, they're just satisfying a temporary desire, or satisfying our base nature. So the square challenges us to rise above this base level of nature, and instead learn to allow the actions and desires to be sublimated to the will of the higher mind. So it's allowing embracing change, so recognising where we need to change the way we act, and recognising where the desires that we pursue are actually inappropriate, they're just temporary, they're not any kind of devotion to any given cause. But ultimately it's all about being willing to change how we do things, because quite often we get attached to doing things a very specific way. Uranus square to Mars here, though, is saying that we need to be open to new ways of doing things that may actually be more beneficial and achieve better results in the long run, but requires that we overcome our inertia or our unwillingness to change how we do things. if we're open to new ways of doing things though, then we may achieve much greater results than we've achieved so far. The other aspects happen at the end of this week. So the first one is Lilith is moving into Aquarius, which is ruled by Uranus, and Mars is there at the moment. So the two will come together at some point in the next few weeks as well. With Lilith in Aquarius, what we're looking at is, where do we have an exaggerated need for freedom? What I mean by that is, where do we fear commitment to the point where we may blow perfectly good relationships or friendships? So the very people who could have helped us feel connected or help us to achieve any long-range goals, we end up alienating them because our fear of commitment prevents us from honouring the other people, and that need to assert ourselves or be seen as unique pushes other people away. But it's also about connecting with future. Aquarius is very much a future-oriented sign. It's seeing what do we need to create for the future, and with Lilith here, it brings almost exaggerated focus on creating the future. So it's committing to action now. So quite often Lilith in Aquarius is a time where people may seem to be kind of ahead of their time. They're talking about things or trying to do things which other people aren't necessarily ready for. But we need to be mindful that whatever actions that we're taking, that we also appreciate the journey. Because with Aquarius being focused on the future, you can be so focused on taking the action necessary to create that future, that when we've achieved that goal, we don't actually appreciate it. We don't appreciate the fruits of our labours. We're just suddenly moving on to something else and completely detached from what we've just been dealing with. So part of the challenge of Lilith in Aquarius will be about appreciating the journey, of recognising the need to take each individual step, and to, when we have achieved a goal, rather than just dismissing it, acknowledge that we've got to that point, we've achieved a goal, and allow ourselves to kind of celebrate it before we move on. Whereas with Lilith in Aquarius, it can be so focused on creating the future that it has no time to enjoy the present. It's only in the present moment that we can truly enjoy life. It's only in the present moment that we can create the future. So it's making sure that we don't allow our minds to become too focused on the future to neglect of enjoying things as they are now. And the other key aspects, it both take place on the 7th. So this would be, the first one is Sun square to Jupiter. It builds up during the course of the week, but it'll be exact on Tuesday. And this particular aspect highlights, where do we have, because Jupiter is obviously about abundance and expansiveness, and with the Sun being our sense of identity, it's where do we have an over-exaggerated sense of expansiveness? Where are our appetites uncontrolled? But it's also, where do we need to remember to be grateful for what comes our way? Because if we're not careful, we can end up with a bit of an entitlement mentality, which we can see the effects of it all around us. People have no appreciation for when they have an entitlement attitude. They have no appreciation for the effort someone's gone to help them. So with Jupiter in square to the Sun, part of what we need to be mindful of is, where do we take things for granted? Where do we not put in the effort because we believe we're owed something? And where do we then create disappointment for ourselves because of our inaction, because we think that things should just always be easy, should just come to us naturally? And some things you have to work hard for. So a key part of it is making sure that we incorporate the discipline of Saturn in Capricorn, so that we're still taking action, we're still taking the necessary actions required to make things happen, because action initiates everything. Jupiter isn't going to bring anything to us if we're not taking any action. So, but at the same time, this square gives us an opportunity to try and incorporate more expansiveness and a greater degree of understanding, and potentially it's an opportunity for us to try and, because squares promote action, it's learn to appreciate the challenges, to appreciate understanding that's hard fought. If we only ever get things the easy way, then we never really appreciate what we have. So this aspect is reminding us that if we take things for granted and we don't bother doing the work, then we're not going to get the things that we want. and we're not going to tap into that grace that guides us, because Jupiter's ultimately the ruler of Sagittarius, which deals with natural laws. So if we want to truly expand, then we need to understand that everything has consequence, everything requires some degree of work in order to make things happen, and it's through committing to work despite any tendencies or desires to remain lazy that we can potentially develop a greater understanding of who we are and our connection with the world around us, and a more humble attitude that appreciates the things that we have rather than dismissing them or neglecting them or just being ungrateful. And on the same day as this particular square is exact, Uranus turns retrograde. So Uranus retrograde is a time, it can feel like an alarm clock that just wakes you up very loudly in the morning. You're deep in sleep, suddenly there's a shock, there's very loud noise that goes smashes straight through the dream. You can't ignore it, and it wakes you up with that such a start that it feels kind of confusing and disorientating initially. But Uranus retrograde is all about taking that transformative energy of Uranus inside ourselves, and with it happening in Taurus initially, what we're looking at is, where do we have untapped resources within us? Where do we have skill sets just waiting to be developed? Where do we have gifts and abilities to manipulate resources in a more frugal way? So how can we achieve greater results with less? And how can we learn to share the resources? Normally shared resources is something to do with Scorpio. With Uranus being about the collective consciousness and more collective sense of being, this transit through Taurus is trying to awaken us to the fact that if we pursue down the materialistic path, then we may well get what we want, but everything else around us will ultimately fall into chaos. Or we can develop what we already have. We can, rather than throwing away what we already have, is seeing how can we renew it, how can we transform it or upcycle it. So take something old and transform it in a way that makes it almost new, so it's still being used, it's not being thrown out. And that's how do we make our resources go further than what we used to. And this again boils down to, are we prepared to learn new skills, new abilities, and new ways of utilising the resources that we have, so that rather than constantly needing to get the next new item, we see how can we take our existing resources and transform them, preferably in a way that doesn't just benefit ourselves but also has a wider benefit to the community around us. So it's about awakening us to our own ability to utilise and manipulate resources, and how can we use these skills to benefit our communities, how can we share our resources so that by pooling the resources together more can be done with less, because rather than loads of people trying to buy the same of everything, pooling the resources and just using the tools when they're necessary and sharing them the rest of the time means that more can be achieved with less. And Taurus is also about our sense of worth, and Uranus is trying to awaken us to that sense of self-worth that isn't based on money, isn't based on what we have, it's more on what we can generate. It's more about appreciating what we have, it's more about sharing what we have and recognising that sharing actually produces more than hoarding, because by sharing resources more can be generated and we can achieve much more as a collective whole. So obviously I'll do another video on this in much more detail, because Uranus retrograde is a topic in its own right. But as I said, the main theme for this week, as a recap, will be our relationship with change and transformation, and how willingly we embrace them, because change is a constant. Change is always happening whether we like it or not, and it's only because we tend to be creatures of comfort or creatures of habit that we resist change in the first place. But when we learn to allow change to permeate and to guide us, we realise that actually there may be something even better than what we already have awaiting us, but can only be arrived at through embracing change, through going through that transformation and following the natural cycles of growth rather than trying to force things to happen at the wrong time. If we can work with the natural cycles and allow that change to guide us and become comfortable with it, so that we just see it as almost like a companion on the journey, the more we let change guide us, the more empowered we become through releasing the old and embracing new things which may be unknown now, but they may prove to be vital for us later on once we're more comfortable with them and we've embraced these new changes. So may the coming week bring much transformation and much growth. Take care, may you be very blessed.